Strategy is a cohesive set of choices that enables you to win in a certain playing field. So it's a bit technical as a description, but it's really like first of all, it's a set of choices. So it's not some kind of inspirational goal that nobody knows how to achieve. It's really almost like a plan of what you're going to do in order for you to be successful. It also contains a choice of where do we want to play, where are we best fit to play. So before you can set your strategy, you really need to understand what environment are we in. How do we understand our capabilities as an organization? Do we understand what we don't have? Do we understand where the puck is moving toward, and what we might need to do to get there? But the reality is, the moment you start implementing your strategy and you're figuring out the stuff isn't working, you should adjust it.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Hello and welcome to the Product Agility Podcast. We're in a maybe a fun new era of the Product Agility Podcast, where we are recording episodes literally hours before they are released. So this is no exception. We're keeping on that vein, and we're going to keep it nice and fresh, because today we have Jurriaan Kamer. I said that okay?
You did, yeah.
I did.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah. Hooray! Welcome.
Thank you.
Jurriaan is somebody who, I can't think how I found you. Maybe it was through the Podmatch tool. I can't remember. But you are here, and you've written a book, and you've been a consultant, and you have spent 20 or so years working in IT, helping hundreds of leaders overcome organizational challenges and helping businesses be successful in various different forms. So it's awesome to have you here. I'm really looking forward to having you share some of the insights from your book, Unblock, and also your insights from your vast career to share with our audience. So welcome to the Product Agility Podcast.
Thank you, Ben. I'm super excited to be here.
So can you tell our listeners what it is that you bring to the party? How come you're in such a good position to talk about helping organizations?
Yeah, so like you said, I did start out in IT. Was fascinated by how to organize large groups of developers and IT people to work together and to build great products. But I increasingly became frustrated and challenged by the rest of the organization. Right, we were doing great in IT. We were going fast. We were moving stuff, breaking things, and that was all fine and fun. But then the annual budgeting cycle hit, or the new CEO had some new idea, and we were pushed down. There was a top-down thing pushed through our throats, or we were facing the realities of lots of approval processes or governance processes that were just hindering our teams to do the right thing. So at that point in time, I became really obsessed with how do we unblock or create agility in the rest of the organization? How can we point this agile toolkit that I had to the management layers and the rest of the organizational bureaucracy? So yeah, that's what I started trying to do, and I've been experimenting with lots of things over the last decade, and decided to write another book about it.
Would you say your clients have said you've been successful in applying this kind of idea of agility at that management layer?
Yeah. I think like the fun thing about working outside of IT is that there's a lot of work to be done outside of IT, right? So I've been working for pharmaceutical companies, logistical companies. Basically, in every industry, there are teams that want to go and move faster and be more adaptive. And obviously, a lot of those industries are being digitalized, but a lot of the work is not digital. It's not software. It's not IT products that are pushed out. It's really about collaboration. Maybe it's a sales team that wants to become better at their work. Sometimes it's a more physical area where people are moving products from A to B in a physical sense. And so these agile ideas and agile practices are applicable there too. However, you cannot just go and copy and paste Scrum on a sales team. I mean, you can try, But I have tried definitely, but the success was limited. So I also, when I started on that journey, I started broadening my horizon of other philosophies and modern ways of organizing that were out there, and I kind of blended everything in and found a set of things that often work.
So the question I was going to ask is then, what has made you successful where so many others have consistently failed? And I'm saying this to be slightly inflammatory, but I don't think the agile industry has really done a good job. And I think that it's littered with failures and very few really meaningful successes. So is it what you've just said you feel which has helped make you the success in this, that you are in this particular arena, or has it been something else?
One of the things that really help is that I've learned over the years to not be, I won't say like condescendent to for management teams and boardroom teams. Like I've really tried to learn their day-to-day challenges and stand next to them and be their trusted advisor, rather than coming in with a framework and saying, hey, everybody's doing this, you should be doing this too. That took a while to overcome some of the frustrations I was having with groups of leaders. But now that I kind of understand their environment, and I can actually respond with helpful things that are helpful for a particular problem they're facing, rather than trying to cut and paste a framework or some kind of methodology onto them that is just not always the right fit. So I think over the years, I've become good at identifying common tensions and figuring out from all the options out there, which is also way beyond agile, what possible solutions there are.
So without wanting to kind of go too much into the thing we were going to talk about, I am interested in something in particular, which is you've been on this journey, you've got better over the years, and surprisingly, you've tried hard at this. What advice would you give to people who can relate to the frustrations and can relate to the senior leadership and organizations not getting on board or being stuck or blocked by management of these processes, but can't get a seat at the table? Like, how did you get those seats at the table? How did you get those introductions to those leadership teams? Mm-hmm. Because I think that agile coaches, maybe even some product managers and organizations, if they struggle with moving out from the weight of the hierarchy above them to have those conversations. So how did you do it?
Yeah, two things came to mind when you were saying that. The first thing is it's quite obvious, but it's very, very useful, is spend a lot of time listening to what they're struggling with, right? Be empathetic to them and stand next to them. Ask if you can join their meetings as an observer. Really try to understand their reality and their world, so you can tune yourself better to be that conversational partner. And the other thing that came to mind is that if they're not listening to you and you have a hard time getting into conversations, make the problem very visible. So one example came to mind with one of the digital accelerators I was working with in a financial company, where there was so much tech debt and so much stupid process that every time a development team had a sprint, they were wasting dozens of hours on either waiting for something else or just not being able to do anything useful or productive, or they have to throw away stuff and have to do it again. And one of the team's product owners decided to start capturing and measuring the numbers, and the hourly rate of everybody was known. So every quarterly meeting where the managers would show up and look at the results, they would also present, this is the, from all the waste we had in the last quarter, this was the beautiful car we could have just bought from the store and wreck it into a wall, because that's the money we wasted just on this stupid stuff. And that, people took notice, because like, oh really? This is like a 50,000 pound car you wasted? What happened? Tell us more. And, so I think visualizing the problem sometimes also help to get the attention you need.
Brilliant. Well, let's not labour too much on this, because we have a lot to talk about. Now, your book, Unblock, has a specific structure to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you mind giving our listeners just an overview of the structure of it, and then any kind of rationale behind that structure, so that we can begin to create a bit of a frame in our minds as to what the book's about?
Yeah. So as I said in my introduction, I'm not a big believer in blueprints and big frameworks, but I am a believer of being very modular and looking at all the possibilities and picking the puzzle pieces that work for you. So that's why the book is structured into 6 domains that I often see organizations being blocked at. And then within those 6 domains, I offer 2 organizational practices for each. You want me to go through the domains just to get a sense of what it is?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the first one is strategy. How to create a strategy that creates focus at scale. Steering, all about creating a rhythm of progress and continuously steering, setting outcome-driven goals and following metrics. The third one is about decision making. So how to accelerate decision making and create complex decisions with consent. Fourth one is about ownership. How to create an environment where people are happily willing to take ownership and are able to do the work they think contributes the most. Number 5 is teamwork. It's everything about fostering a team that has more empathy, psychological safety, and habits for reflection and feedback. And the final one is all about meetings. So helpful meeting structures, facilitation techniques, and ways to minimize meeting overload. And so the reason I'm put that structure into place is that it allows people, after a very short introduction, to figure out which domain am I most attracted to. So you can just decide for yourself which chapter I'm going to read next and which chapters I'm going to ignore for now. And over time, you'll find ways to start unblocking and start changing stuff.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering, you start with strategy. And I was enjoying reading through the strategy chapter because I think that often strategy is the biggest kind of misunderstood thing. I don't think anyone does a good job at really explaining it succinctly and concisely across any industry, any role. I think people have so many different ideas as to what it could be. And I like the way that you provided some examples of strategies which were maybe a bit fluffy, a bit unclear, not really fit for the purpose of being able to say no to something. And then you came across, and I'm not sure if this is your idea or something that you've borrowed, but the idea of strategic intent. I would love it if you could share with our listeners your views on what strategy is and how you can move from something which is fluffy and vague and not enabling you to anchor any decisions into something which actually can begin to cure some of the woes that we experience in organizations.
Yeah, so strategy is a cohesive set of choices that enables you to win in a certain playing field. So it's a bit technical as a description, but it's really like first of all, it's a set of choices. So it's not some kind of inspirational goal that nobody knows how to achieve. It's really almost like a plan of what you're going to do in order for you to be successful. It also contains a choice of where do we want to play, where are we best fit to play. So before you can set your strategy, you really need to understand what environment are we in. Do we understand our capabilities as an organization? Do we understand what we don't have? Do we understand where the puck is moving toward, and what we might need to do to get there? So it contains a lot of hypotheses, and that's also one of the reasons why a lot of strategy work is bad, because people are afraid to be wrong. And if you are the new CEO and you're announcing your strategy, you want to announce a strategy that you can that might not fail, but the reality is, the moment you start implementing your strategy and you're figuring out the stuff isn't working, you should adjust it. You shouldn't make a strategy exercise is not a once in a 5-year thing. It's really something that happens multiple times a year, and readjust if you're going in the right direction. So yeah, going back to the definition, it's a set of choices. And one thing that really helps with setting a set of choices that helps create focus and alignment, because in the end, that's what you hope a strategy will do, is create get more people in the organization to follow you in a certain direction, and cut out all of the things that are not helping going toward that direction. Right? If a strategy isn't able to focus anything, then your strategy isn't effective, at least not internally. So it should be almost like a 1-page or half-page document that explains what we really need to do and achieve in the next couple of years, while also leaving enough room for interpretation. So another problem with strategy is what I often see is that they become lists of all the projects and lists of all the goals and all the activities in the organization, because we have to add that to the list as well, because otherwise that department feels left out. And there's all sorts of reasons why when we come together at an offsite, we end up with this kind of fluffy long list or a very fluffy goal that everybody can say yes to, but nobody knows what it means. And the art of creating a good strategic intent is that it needs to be both inspiring and concrete. So what really helps with that is to set a strategy that is longer term. So not 100 years out, because then again, so you don't know how to achieve it. But a lot longer than 1 year. Usually my default is actually 2 to 3 years out, because it allows you to be bold and say, you know what, actually this is the thing we're doing. But it also leaves enough room for interpretation, and that's what you want. You want teams and people in the organization to look at that strategy and say, I kind of understand what it means. It doesn't prescribe all the solutions, but it gives enough guidance for me to go in a direction and make local day-to-day decisions that moves us into that direction. So yeah, that's the lay of the land. But I can talk for hours about this.
Yeah,
so let me tell you where I want to go.
No, I mean, I'd love to listen to you for hours about it, to be honest with you. But we should probably focus, because we haven't got all the time in the world. I was wondering if you have an organization which has, I don't know, like 20 different products, so digital products or maybe even physical products, they're all serving various different markets. How is it feasible in your mind to have one strategy that then overarches all of those without it kind of being so homogenous and so vague that it doesn't really mean anything, but yet not so detailed that it's kind of telling people what to do? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, the way I think about it is that a strategy is a fractal. So it's a pattern that repeats at different levels. So you can have an organizational, top level strategy that should at least articulate what are the shifts and the changes that the organization needs in the next couple of years. And then a department or a product line could look at that and say, that's the shift. Okay, we're moving from desktop to mobile. I'm just saying something because I'm old, We're moving, moving from the desktop to mobile. Everybody suddenly has these black things in their pockets. There's mobile phones. Oh, wow, we should probably do something with that, because we're, it's just an example, maybe these days it's AI or something else. Let's take AI. So maybe it's like the top level strategy of the organization identifies that we have to build capabilities to leverage new technologies around AI, because we believe, and then you have to really explain the why. Why is that really going to help you and your customers and your business succeed? And then as a product line, you can look at that and say, well, if that is the thing that we need to develop, then for us or for our product, that means building this and this and this and this. So it's a repetition. And then maybe depending on the size, as one software development team or a group of software development teams could look at that and say, if that is the thing, our domain is maybe the physical infrastructure in our IT data centers and whatnot. Well, if that's what we need, if we're going to move to AI, that means for us we really need to invest in GPUs or whatever it is that you need to support this processing power. So that's how it works. So it is in a way a goal setting exercise, but longer term, and it should allow people to derive what goals they take for the shorter term.
Yeah. And I think, if you're interested in this as a listener, then I do recommend you check out the book, because there is some really solid advice and guidance on there on how to move away from fluffy, very cheerleadery kind of mission statements to something which is actually practically useful. And I can, sadly, if I think back to my corporate career, can count the number of strategies which were actually kind of worth their salt on probably on a few digits. And I think it's really, and I'm absolutely been guilty on my learning journey of helping people come up with things which were fluffy and unclear. But I think that when you have a situation where leaders are willing to draw a line in the sand, say, no, this is our bet, this is how we think we're going to achieve the growth that we need, or we're going to penetrate that particular market that we need, and not be afraid to adapt that strategy and tweak it as you go through. I mean, that takes a lot of courage. And I think it takes a lot of, interestingly, data, but more than just for data, it needs a lot of analysis to really understand, actually, like, is this the right thing? How are we going to go about doing it? And if you can put that in, then I said what you're saying in the book, and I think probably something that we both align on, is that then with that alignment at that level, that allows a certain degree of autonomy at lower levels.
Right. That's the whole point. Yeah, that's what my whole book starts by explaining the concept of aligned autonomy. Something that I think most of your listenership probably already grasp. It's a picture that you've seen. I asked Henrik Nieberg for permission from one of his Spotify videos if I could use it. But the book, as the target audience of the book is also leaders that are not so aware of these things. And so everything in the book tries to help you create an organization that has high autonomy, but also high alignment. Which is kind of the holy grail of building an adaptable organization where the professionals that you've hired are able to make really smart decisions every day based on a framework that adds up to something more than the sum of its parts.
Which sounds lovely and really
Yeah, it does.
desirable. Right? But people, agile coaches, product professionals, even some leaders are going to be listening to this saying, yeah, absolutely, who wouldn't want that? But that's also a bit like the fluffy mission statements that we come up with, right? So practically, what tips have you got for people to help foster some of that aligned autonomy? Like what advice can you provide to some of our listeners? Yeah, not so much that you're obviously giving away your book for free and we've only got a few minutes, but what springs to mind?
I mean, one thing, if we go back to the strategy example, one example in there is to move away from some of the top down things that are happening a lot that are actually destroying aligned autonomy, and making people disengage with what's happening. And people, are like, whatever, these leaders that don't get it. They always send down orders that are not fit for what I need, and I'll just do my work, but whatever. That's not what you want. You want high engagement, and high aligned autonomy creates engagement. So for the strategy example, I have another chapter on it, which is like, don't cascade your strategy, but integrate your strategy. There's this old adagium of, well, if we have your strategy, the only thing we need to do to implement is to cascade it. Meaning, like, we're going to roll it out, we're going to create communications, we're going to give people PowerPoints, we are going to ask our middle management layers to give it to the teams, and they just have to listen to it and follow it. More often than not, that is an exercise that results into nothing, because those PowerPoints are so far removed from the day-to-day reality that people are like, whatever, this looks a lot like last year's strategy deck.
I mean, it's a misunderstanding with some of this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just bear with me on this, but sometimes people think that the PowerPoint is the strategy.
Right. Yeah.
And that's all it is. It's just this deck. And then as long as we share the deck, then everyone has the strategy, and then our job is done.
Yeah. Well, and then what happens in practice? People will go to their to-do list and their pet peeve projects and everything, and they're like, "How can we make the link between our agenda and the strategy so we can kind of prove that we are following the strategy?" And basically, nothing really changes. The only thing they need to change is the narrative. It's like we have to have our answer ready for when one of the leaders comes in and asks us, like, "How are you aligned to the strategy?" And then we have we just. Let's make up some things.
Yeah, well, it's limited by your imagination rather than a practically useful constraint. It's okay, so we want to do this. So how can we tell the story as to why we're going to do that? And I think that's what a lot of the time I always saw, particularly on some like big architectural shifts, which people really wanted to try and do. They would just make up reasons why it aligned to the strategy, or make up a really solid reason as to why it shouldn't align to the strategy. Maybe the strategy has missed something, but just kind of really missing the point on that. So when we talk about integration rather than cascade, like practically speaking, what does that mean?
What it means at the moment if you're a leadership team and you're creating a new strategy or you're updating your strategy, you really make an effort to integrate people's perspectives all across the organization. So you go and leverage either digital tools, or you have a lot of conversations with people that are doing the work, that are creating the value, that are maybe in touch with customers every day, and you ask them for input. Like, what is it that we're missing? What is it that we're not doing that we should be doing? What is it? And if you look at our strategy, do you think it will help you create any focus? Right? Does it really do something for you? And you integrate all of those ideas and perspectives into the new strategy. And then when you go, and then when you have your strategy, you invite teams and departments into an exercise of self-alignment, meaning like, hey, the organization's strategy is X, your role in that is Y. And to maximize your contribution to that strategy, what is your team's strategic intent going to be, and what are the trade-offs you are going to make? And you make that you make that transparent. You go and request that every department does that and publishes what that means, and then we have a conversation about where we see deviations or where we see interesting new things that we weren't considering. So it becomes something that happens at every level basically. And we start, maybe you can compare it to you're co-authoring a book together, with everyone in the organization, and you're creating this strategic map and awareness. So then you can go off and be autonomous of how you're going to achieve it.
I think this is one of the big challenges, is that often when people make changes, I think that those changes could be from the market, for the product perspective, but also some strategy results in some level of organizational change and operating model change. And there was one bullet point, which I just kind of got in front of me here, which I really like, because I think it's something that often people forget throughout the organization, unless you're actually in a team, which is, what are the biggest challenges that our people face every day? What gets in their way? Because I think there's a reasonably strong argument to say that if your strategy isn't resolving the things that get in people's way, then perhaps it isn't actually feasible. And it's the feasibility of the strategy, which I think is often missed, right? They haven't done the analysis. It isn't feasible. They don't engage customer stakeholders teams. They don't figure out what needs to happen to kind of overcome the obstacles that are facing them, because not even aware what the obstacles are. They just think that this deck will magically solve everything. Yeah.
It's really the strategy implementation or execution or realization, whatever word you want to use, is all about, if this is what we want, are we set up in a way that we're able to achieve that? Like, what other changes do we need to make other than just creating a new marketing campaign? It also should be pointed at the organization. Like, how is the organization in the way for us to achieve this success?
So there was a phrase in your book which I liked, because I thought it was a nice take on, I think, something that I've been speaking about for a while, but I prefer your language on it, which was harmony addiction. What did you mean by harmony addiction?
Yeah, harmony addiction is when when everybody in the team doesn't want to unsettle the artificial harmony that is happening, where it's like, we agree and we disagree, but we don't talk about the elephant in the room, and we don't talk about how maybe one person's behavior is always disrupting everything, or we don't talk about how we might talk about it behind each other's backs, maybe at the coffee machine, maybe between one-on-one conversations, but as a group we never really talk about how John's behavior is really crossing a border, or maybe the leader is so unclear on what they want that everybody's just chasing their tails. That's what harmony addiction is about, which is a sign of very low psychological safety, where you're afraid to speak up and afraid of the consequences of speaking up.
So what are the impacts of harmony addiction to an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it means that the things that need to be addressed are not addressed. It means that the team is not growing. The team is not learning together. It means that those blockers that are there stay in place for a long time. It means that some of the top talent might flee because they don't want to be in that group. It might mean that the business outcomes are not being met because the things that really need to be said at the leadership team level or at another level are just not being said or being addressed. So yeah, it's harmful in a lot of ways.
I suppose it isn't a straight, nice, easy, kind of simple thing to understand, because this harmony addiction can happen at all different levels of your organization, and then I suppose does then get in the way and stops people achieving their strategic goals. And I suppose if a team then really care and believe in the strategy and what we're trying to achieve, you would hope that drive with a good dash of psychological safety will allow people to overcome some of that harmony addiction, which I've often seen has manifested as like a no blame culture. But actually, it wasn't no blame; it was just blame avoidance. It was avoiding the hard conversations.
Yeah, and I think no blame culture is not the right word, because it implies that if we are going to address something, we need to blame someone. But I think it's more about the content, not the people, right? So it might be. I think my colleague actually, she says everything is in everything. So if we avoid to make the tough choice, that probably means there's an organizational thing that is causing that behavior. So I'm always very empathetic for, if I'm going to give somebody's feedback, if I'm going to give somebody some kind of feedback, I always have to look behind, what is behind that? What's the behavior? What's the fear? What's the competing commitment that is causing it? So I take a systemic lens and definitely don't blame, because I think in the end, everybody has the right to receive feedback and has the right to at least be given a chance to develop themselves. The other thing I think what is what is problematic with harmony addiction is it can happen in the whole organization. So if a leadership team is really not doing this, it will perpetuate throughout the organization. And especially I've seen I've worked with several Swiss companies where and I think also in Sweden it's also like even country culture that sometimes causes this at scale, where it's like, you know what, we all have to be super nice to each other. We don't want to insult anybody, and that means that when we are going to make a decision, we need to do that through consensus. We have to make sure that everybody's opinion is being integrated into the decision, which means you'll get nowhere, right?
Yeah.
Consensus can becomes really slow and impossible to move forward. One of the things that comes to mind.
That's perfect. It reminds me of a TV program I've been watching recently with my wife called Industry. And it's about graduates in investment banks.
Okay.
And I watch it and I'm like, wow, that takes me back. I was never a graduate. I was never good enough to get on a graduate scheme. My career in banking started, I just got in as a temp. I turned up in a corduroy suit and was given an opportunity to work in a call centre. And then I came up through the banking and starting at the bottom. But then did get the opportunity to spend lots of time on trading floors and lots of time around graduates. And me and my wife are watching it. And there's some scenes where people are just really arguing about how they're going to make sure that the bank earns money and what hard decisions they're going to have to make and what tactics they're going to use, what's their strategy for making money and how do they deal with this problem. And my wife turned around to me and she's like, what must it be like to be in a meeting room full of really intelligent people arguing for the good of the company?
Right.
What a wonderful situation to be in. And there was, it's not like people there disliked each other. They were arguing. There was conflict, but it was for the greater good, and they could all appreciate that and get on board with whatever decision was made. And I think that's such a useful situation to put yourself in. And that's the one thing that I suppose do remember fondly from my early years in banking was that, you just around clever people who are like, we're going to find a way to be successful. And that might mean that we have really hard conversations and we say no to stuff, but we're not going to go for false harmony. If I think it's crap, I'm going to tell you I think it's crap, and we're going to work through that. And I think that's such a powerful situation to be in. Yeah,
exactly. It's a constructive disagreement. It's a state where if somebody disagrees with me, I know that they still care about me and they don't think I'm an asshole. Like it's, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that on your podcast, but
you can say anything you fucking want. It's fine.
All right, but
I say anything you want.
Yeah. Well, now you get me thinking.
Yeah, it depends what you can weave into the conversation, right? Yeah,
I'm Dutch, so you never know. You never know what comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, you guys are pretty liberal.
Yeah, so it's like in for the interview of my book, there was I interviewed someone at Coca-Cola, and he says, the what we're really trying to do is create a team where people are not afraid to share their ugly babies, and that means like these early unformed ideas that is shit, but you might be onto something. And if teams are able to share those ideas and people wrestle with it and give feedback and make it better, then those things can grow into brilliance. And if nobody's doing that because they're afraid of what people might say, then you won't get the outcomes you want.
And I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. And I also think that it's that type of story which shared in isolation has led to such a awful predicament for many, many agile coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Because they hear little statements, they take little statements like that, and they work in an environment where it's devoid of strategy which is meaningful, where everyone's saying yes to everything, where the technical landscape is pretty dire and it isn't really possible for them to react quickly. You've got product managers who want to go out and test ideas, but guess what? They can't, because everything takes so long to get out and get feedback from, and there are no feedback loops. So I do absolutely know what you believe. I think what I don't want listeners to think is that these are magic little silver bullets, right, which are going to solve it. Because actually, I think you'd agree that that sharing of your ugly baby done in the right context, where things have shifted and there is a great performance culture and people know what success means and there is alignment and integration with strategy, then they can do that and you're going to move forward. Otherwise, I mean, how many meetings have we been in where people say, share any idea and the rest of it doesn't make any difference, because actually that team aren't empowered to make any real decisions. The juggernaut's left the station, man. We're going to be doing this anyway, so you can share what you like. It's not actually going to change anything. And I think this is when then agile coaches lose a lot of credibility, because they try and create this lovely warm kind of hugging environment where people can share what they want, but no one ever delivers.
Right. Yeah, that's tough.
It is tough. Anyway, I had an axe to grind there, clearly. But with all of this, then comes the idea, which is something I borrowed from Peter Senge, actually, in the book The Fifth Discipline, which I was really interested to read. It was quite mildly attacked in good strategy, bad strategy, which I thought was a really interesting little insight, which I kind of lovely. I'm going to try and get Richard on the podcast, actually, and drill him a little bit on that, because I find it very interesting. But one thing that Peter Senge in Systems, the Fifth Discipline, the book called Systems Thinking, says is that effective systems are all about making good trade-offs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you advocate with something called the even over technique. Would you mind giving us a little bit of an insight into that? Because I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, so the practice of even overstatements are actually inspired by the Agile Manifesto, right? So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's just a really great way of expressing a heuristic, so a rule of thumb that somebody can take and apply to local decision making. Over the years, me and my team and the teams I've worked at, we've kind of took that to the next level, where it's like at every team or every product or every strategy, we can think of these kinds of statements that will help people understand what they won't prioritize, because that's often the problematic thing. Like you said earlier, we want all the things, and it's very hard to say no to something. And if you have a really good even overstatement, I don't know, like for example, when I wrote the book, I depict the trade-off short and practical, even over in-depth and comprehensive. And that's just an expression of the design principle I'm using for the book. Mm-hmm. And that gives me permission to skip theory in some areas, whereas like maybe other books would now spend a whole chapter explaining how this works and why it works and who invented it. I just don't do it. I just, that's a trade-off. I'm putting in a footnote of where people can find more, but the book needs to be short and practical to be successful. And if you look at, I don't know, if you look at a simple and maybe a stale example, but the example that I love to use often, which speaks to people's imagination, is Patagonia's product strategy, which is sustainability even over profit. They're famous for that. People know that if you buy something from Patagonia, there have been people making choices along the way to improve sustainability and to be good for the planet. And you know what? If you make a choice like that, and if you do that really well and you get famous for that and you're able to do that, you get profit. So it's like you often get the second half of the trade-off if you're doing something really good in the first half of the trade-off. But if you don't make trade-offs, then the universe around you will decide what the trade-off is going to be. And so the trade-offs are always made if you like them or not, but the power is in choosing them and being explicit about what it is that you want to trade off.
Yeah, I think it's an unavoidable consequence of life, is that we have to make trade-offs, and if we don't make, like I say, if we don't make the trade-off, then something else will make the trade-off on our behalf, or we just end up in a situation where we don't feel comfortable. Would you say that these even over statements are like akin to policies within a strategy, or would you say they're more? Is it like something else? Because I think I've been on. I think those lovely kind of principle-based things where you can say, great, we value this over this, and this is where we're going. A really good kind of guiding
principles.
Guiding principles. But would you say they also almost can be manifested as like a policy almost, or is that something different?
Yeah, policy I think has a similar objective to set some guardrails around something you want to create. They can definitely be used for that, absolutely. And but I use them in lots of different ways. So another example is after me and we are a 3 people consultancy, so really small. But after we've done our retrospective every 6 weeks or so, we sit down and spend half an hour crafting even overstatements for the next couple months, and those are often behavioral. So one of them is customer validation even over opinions, because we've identified that in the last month we've been bickering over things and not testing them. Me and one of my co-founders are really different in terms of our personalities and character. So one of our trade-offs is appreciating difference even over resolving differences. which is a good reminder that every week when we meet, we look through those even overstatements and we're like, yeah, this is what we are reminded of, that this is our intentions. And that shifts and drives our behavior. So it can be behavioral, it can be product related, it can be overarching company strategy, but these are just very useful little expressions of a choice that I just encourage people to do a lot more.
Excellent. I like that. We are running out of time, but we have not yet run out of time. So I wouldn't mind some quick answers to some questions, if that's okay.
I'll keep it short.
Let's see how many we can squeeze in.
Okay.
So you thinking about leadership, and you describe leaders as road designers rather than traffic controllers. Is that right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the two, and what mindset shifts are critical for tech leaders to make that transition?
Yeah, I want leaders to be working on the system rather than in the system a lot more. I want leaders to be organization designers. And I use this traffic metaphor because, somebody who is in the middle of the intersection, directing traffic, going left, going right, that person is really busy. And that work could be outsourced to a system of traffic lights, or maybe a roundabout or something where the work just flows without them needing to be in the work every day. And they can zoom out and they can look at the whole thing and say, oh, interesting, maybe we should change this design somewhere. So so the work moves more flows more better. So that got out of my throat wrong, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, it's a nice kind of it's a nice way of talking about it.
Yeah. Was that short enough?
Yeah, it was pretty short. So if you think of one then big critical mindset shift that's needed for leaders to achieve that, what would you say is the most critical mindset shift?
The mindset shift is that as leader, you don't need to have all the answers. I mean, maybe you've been promoted into that role and being promoted because you were successful, and maybe you had all the answers over the years and you're obviously smart. Otherwise you wouldn't have been able to get there, but you don't need to have all the answers. And if you just let go of that notion, you can just go and be vulnerable and ask other people in the organization, and especially the teams that are doing the work, if they have an answer. And maybe some things don't have an answer, and you just have to try a few things to get a bunch of answers. And that's what continuous steering is all about.
Super. Okay. Cultural change. How can leaders help to create lasting cultural change when you have a certain degree of resistance to change in an organization?
Yeah. Well, two things. First of all, people watch your feet, not your lips, is a quote I discovered when I was writing this book. So it's all about walking the talk and modeling the behavior you want to see. And I'm still surprised by leaders that are saying that people should decline our meetings, but they're in meetings all day themselves. Those are just examples of things that are incongruent. The other thing is, in general, people don't necessarily resist change, but the types of change that they resist if it's imposed on them, and they don't have a way to participate and shape the organization and move forward. So I sometimes explain it like if people all the time, they go on holidays, they make trips around the world, they buy a new house, they move stuff, and people love that change. But it's very different if somebody comes to your house, maybe the mayor of the city, and say, you know what, next week you're going on holiday to the desert. Good luck. And of course you get resistance to that. Like, people want to choose. People want to be able to choose and want to be involved in those kinds of important things that affect them.
So then when you're in a situation where there's a bit of resistance to change, maybe the teams are feeling overworked, and then as a leader, you think, okay, what we need is to encourage a bit of experimentation, allow people to learn. Is there a different approach you would take other than like walking the walk to help those teams kind of untap some of their ability to experiment?
Yeah, I think if you have a certain direction in mind for the culture or for the way of working of the organization, I really believe in participatory change. So you sit down with the team and really spend time understanding what are their issues and what are some of the things that you have around the corner. What might they, how can those things be helpful to the actual tensions that team is experiencing? Those are you get people to be aware of their challenges. You give them new tools and ideas that are fit with the new principles of where the organization wants to go. And you help them run experiments themselves, which is a very different type of change than, next month you're going through 5 workshops to get a new training on this methodology and you must use it. all size fits all approach. It's really about tailoring and letting teams and people choose what they want to adopt when. That would really unlock some culture change over time.
Awesome. Thank you very much for those little quick-fire questions. And thank you very much for spending this time with me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great insight into your work and your book and your history, and you've shared some brilliant tidbits with the listeners of this little podcast of mine. If you could think of one closing statement to leave our listeners with, what is it you want them to take away?
There is hope. There's just hundreds of examples of organizations that have been able to make the shift into more modern, progressive, more adaptive ways of working in every industry. So if you're in a company that doesn't seem to move into that direction, there are companies out there that are doing it and are very successful at it. So there's definitely hope.
Lovely. Thank you very much. If people want to find out more about you, obviously they can find you on LinkedIn, and we'll include your LinkedIn profile link in the description for this episode. But if they want to look at your book and your consultancy and the type of thing that you do, what is the website they can visit?
They can go to www.unblock.works, and you can find the book on Amazon as well.
Excellent. And it's a very good book. I do recommend that people check it out. I think there's lots of really practical advice. It's structured very well, and it's a joy to breeze through. That's a strange sentence, isn't it? It's a joy to read. Let's put it that way. So thank you very much. Yes, it's been great to have you on. And everyone, thank you very much for listening. As I said, we're recording this episode. The time is now 10:39 in the UK. So by the time you're listening to this, it's going to be, I don't know, just a mere hours after we finish recording. So enjoy the freshness of this episode. Let us know what you've liked by tagging myself or Jurriaan on LinkedIn. Ask us some questions. Give us your feedback. We are all ears. Or if you really want to, you can actually send the podcast a text message like we're back in the 1990s. And if you look on your podcast platform of choice, you'll see a little link there saying text the show. Feel free to text the show and let us know what you think. We love to get your feedback and to know that you're listening to us. So, everyone, thank you very much for listening. Jurriaan, thank you very much for coming along. This has been the Product Agility Podcast, and we'll be back again next week.